I mean, I just wanted to do this so I'll have it on tape once, and I'll clear my conscience that, after all these years of research that I've, the hadith that says if you hide your knowledge, then in the final day, you're harnessed to the harness of the camel. So now I cleared my conscience and discharged my duty, and then it's done. But I don't believe that it has anything to do with resources at all. I think it has to do with something much more basic than that. You are living in an age in which there is very little certainty and very little security. This is modernity. You're not assured you're even going to live and die in the same area. People are jumping around all the time. They cannot guarantee anything. I mean, the security that used to exist from family relations, at least someone there to always take care of you. The modern age is a very vicious age, and there's a lot of insecurity. On top of that, you exist as a culture, as a defeated, demoralized culture. I mean, when you think about it, we went up and down about Salman Rushdie. At the end, neither the book was banned, nor the man was dead. When the whole Muslim world rises against a man and is unable to either stop the book or kill the man, it gives you a sense of the extent of our defeat. We're nothing. We're absolutely nothing. Zilch. We can't even do I'm not saying that we should have killed Salman Rushdie. I think this whole fatwa was nonsense. But the point is, the demoralization that follows from that is extensive. And whenever an Islamic thing got rough socially and politically, someone had to pay. I mean, if I'm frustrated at work, if my boss is humiliating me at work, I need to feel my worst somewhere. Either I take it out on my students or I take it out on my family. To come and say, no, don't take it out on anyone, needs a person of high moral character or intensive knowledge to be able to guard it. In my experience, discourses about women in the contemporary age are much more about power dynamics than anything else. In other words, feeling a sense of alienation and frustration. It is a very comfortable image. It's a very secure image and a comfortable image. If you can at least stabilize this one side of your life. Okay? To put it bluntly to you, you want an image of a model Muslim wife, mother, daughter, whatever it is. What's that model? I mean, she wears a hijab, so there's no competition. I mean, I don't mind people. If you believe the hijab is an obligation, then you should do it, and you must do it. But what ails me is that the discourses that the hijab have taken are completely different. Where it says, لا يعلمن فيؤذين, so they will not be recognized and hurt. Well, can't you construct an argument that sometimes, nowadays, wearing the hijab is what makes you distinguishable and hurtable, but no one wants to listen to any jurisprudential argument. People don't care about what jurisprudence says. When the Quran says, the operative cause behind the law is protection, not enticement. It says protection, that they will not be recognized, so they will be hurt. Why? Because the hypocrites used to target Muslim women and hurt them. And so the Quran came and said, all of you must look the same. And since the exposure of the chest, all of us can agree about that. Then that's the operative cause for the law. Can't we say that it depends on the context? In some contexts, not wearing the veil will be the cause for you to be hurt or injured. Then you should wear the veil. In other contexts, it will be the cause for you to be hurt if you wear the veil. And then the operative cause is the reason the law exists. But no one is interested. So you want a woman that's a muhajjaba, so there's no competition. And a woman, constructed image of feminine, constructed image of a woman. The definition of the woman that is soft is what? Is this person who's obedient, submissive, quiet, because it's a very comforting image. The world can be as harsh as the world wants to be. But you'll always go someplace where you'll sit down and this will, someone will rush to your service. Literally saying, yes, master, how can I please you? It's not something new. I mean, the West has constructed it in the form of the Orientalist harem, and we are constructing it today in the form of the so-called Muslim woman who, if you read Islamic literature at all, goes to heaven only if her husband is pleased with her, if the Prophet would have ordered someone to prostrate, a human being to prostrate to another human being, he would have ordered a wife to prostrate to her husband, that if he has a pus excreting ulcer from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet and she licks it for him, she wouldn't fulfill his right. That if he says, come here, submit to me on the back of a camel, she must comply. Isn't that the image of a woman that's constructed today? It's not just the hijab. In other words, a non-problematic woman. A woman who is submissive, passive, non-competitive, non-problematic, to be an element of stability in a highly unstable modern age. That's what I believe it's all about. Not about these sources. And that's why I don't even bother talking about these sources to Muslims anymore. I don't think they care, and I think even in a lecture like this, most people basically want to know what the point is, not what the sources say. Because we are completely desensitized to the process of evidence gathering.
In terms of the evidence gathering and evidence being real, I think people have been taught since they were born by the so-called Muslim parents to mystify knowledge, to mystify their leaders. Like, I see this unconditional belief in what a scholar says. People are basically telling you that, the knowledge is there, and it's somewhat mystified because they don't know the Arabic language. They don't have the access to all these novel knowledge here. And so, because of that, they've mystified it to a level that is unreachable. Like, any evidence that you presented, like, say if these people were sitting with us right now, any evidence you presented, they would have just shut their minds off about 20 minutes ago.
No, I know that. In fact, they shut their minds off as soon. The first 5 minutes, we want to know what your conclusion will be. And depending on where you think you're going to end up, that's when they shut off. In other words, if they think that the conclusion of all of this 2 hours and a half of talking is that hijab is not a requirement, they're shut off. What I find amazing is no one has ever debated anything. I haven't been engaged once. I mean, everywhere it's basically the process of exclusion, but not engagement. In other words, you say, oh, this is the person who creates problems for them.
Well, what type of form do we have to have this type of engagement you speak of? The masjid is completely controlled by hierarchy, and our schools there's no open forum. I mean, you basically have your living room right now. This is the only time I've ever had in my life where there's been proper engagement. I mean, what would you recommend that we do? That we actually have kind of formalized that? There's a lot more people than this we love.
No, there are tons of people who are suffering from this problem. In every conference that I've gone to, it's always been the same. The response from the young people raised in the United States is extremely excited. Because it's like discovering a new Islam, literally. Oh, we didn't know it was so complex. We didn't know that there was so much debate. We always thought that Islam, everything was clear-cut, black and white. We always thought that we learned everything we need to learn in the first 2 ISNA conferences, for example. And after that, you just keep repeating the same things over and over. Be pious, fear God, be good to your parents, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And they're very excited. And you're absolutely right. It's the hierarchy that always steps in and says, no, we don't want you to be thinking in terms of these complexities. But in terms of asking me what to do, I don't know. I'm not an activist. I mean, I am simply a bookworm. I read and I write and then I explain what I've read. But in terms of institutionally being able to do anything, that's not something that I can even. All I can tell you is that if we have a chance of survival, we must be able to establish our own academic, intellectual institutes and forums funded entirely domestically, not from foreign money, and built on the principle of criticalness and not dogma. I don't know. I mean, I've been asked this question a million times. I mean, all I can think of is that there must be intellectual forums for Muslims in which there is sort of an allergic reaction to dogma and a keen interest in supporting and funding critical thinking. Because, I mean, we're in an intellectual rut, and if we're not even going to bring back half of the richness of the Islamic civilization unless we are able to come to a speaker or a writer and say, listen, The first rule of all, you are worth my time. You have to teach me something. You have to tell me something new. And if you don't, you're not worth my time. If you just impose that simple standard, you're going to cancel out about 99% of all lectures and speeches and writings in the Muslim world, particularly in the United States. Because most of it doesn't say anything new. You've heard all the hadiths before, you've heard the whole bunch before. Now, how does one start types of institutes or intellectual forums or so on? I mean, I get my feeling is someone active enough, determined enough, they can. And if there are enough of these people, they'll set them up. And if they invite the critical thinkers and marginalize the dogmatists, right now it's opposite. The dogmatists have completely marginalized the critical thinkers. But I've never thought of myself as a critical thinker. When I came to the United States, I always thought of myself as a traditional Jewish. It was to my great shock that suddenly, not only a traditional Jewish, but back home, I've always thought of myself as a very conservative Jewish. I don't like chairs, I don't like a lot of modern things, but I come to the United States and I've discovered that here I'm a liberal. I've been transformed into you consider it radical. Well, I'm not sure that it's an issue of liberalism or anything like that. I truly feel it is a fidelity to a simple principle. None of us represent the divine will. We search the divine will. Right? And basically we try to convince each other of what the divine wants. There are certain things that are clear cut and obvious. There are things that I will listen to someone, for example, try to argue that there are 5 prayers that you should pray 3 times a day. I will debate that. I will engage in that. But for someone to come and tell me that there are no 5 prayers, there are only 2 prayers a day, first, before I give that person time to listen to you, I want to see some real research. I will consider that. But based first on proof of some real work. Because the presumption is against it. Here we're talking about furud, and here we're talking about the basics of religion. The presumption is against, not for. While everything else, when someone comes and the presumption is for you. The presumption that you have, the presumption of your right to speak is for you, not against you. Because you have a duty to honor ma'ruf and nahi al munkar. But if it's someone else that's going to define the ma'ruf for you and the munkar, joining the good and forbidding the evil, but if it's someone else that's going to come and define the good for you and the evil for you, then what is your role exactly? To go and ask and tell me, okay, give me a list of the good and evil and let me just go around, show the list to people? And so what role do you play? If you do not have the ability to investigate the good and the evil, and to come to a conviction, and know that if your conviction is based on hawa, on whim, because your mother likes it, or because your father told you so, or because you can gain some advantage socially or something, if you adopt a certain position, you are going to answer for that on the final day. And you're going to pay very heavily. Because you basically played around with God's religion. But if your conviction is based on true investigation, nothing that's do with hawa. And here, this is true jihad. Because most of us adopt what we adopt because our parents have oriented us one way or the other. That's still hawa. I think that's not any better than someone who comes to say, this is the law, do it. From someone that says, no, I don't believe this is the law. And both of them are basically debating according to what makes their life more comfortable in their social setting. I think there's a duty to investigate. And I think that there's a duty there's a duty to search the divine will and to debate the divine will very seriously.
Most of what's happening in the United States is that there's this great effort for dawah. We bring speakers like Siraj Wahaj, and he's very influential in the ability to associate with people on all levels and to reach out to people. And so once we've reached out to them, we're like, okay, here's the Quran. And then after that, there really isn't much left because the dogma says it, right? And it's hurt a lot of people I've met away.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of converts who have reverted back or reverted away from Islam again, and particularly women. I mean, women converts have the worst situation of all. Either they come in more vigilant about the dogma than Muslims themselves, which is fine, but often they come in with really high hopes. High hopes. Often they're married by either a person who wants a green card or married by a person who has different attitudes towards American women than Arab or Indo-Pakistani women. I mean, I used to work in these divorce cases and abuse cases. It was basically the attitude of the man. I treat an American woman differently than I treat an Indo-Pakistani woman or Egyptian woman, because these are like real women. But American women are. And consequently, the poor woman undergoes a tremendous amount of what I call abuse. And often, I mean, I can't tell you how many cases, for example, how many cases in which the husband marries an American woman, she's a student here, and once his studies are done, he goes back home to look for a wife, and if he doesn't find one, he comes back to her, but if he finds one, basically she's literally enormous amount. I think there is something, this should tell us that we're really abusing our religion. Because no minimal amount of understanding of Islam would legitimate something like this. When I used to go to these conferences, that's another one of the reasons he banned me from them, the ICNA and ISNA and all the famous acronyms, the Qurayshi camp, this camp, that. I would always come in, and this is how I always start the lecture. I say, look around you. Count the number of converts in the room. And, as always, it will be a handful. I mean, it will be maybe 3-4%, and out of 100, it will be about 3-4 people. And so you want proof that Islam has failed in the United States? That's it. Islam historically has died. Every place in which it has failed to win domestic converts, in other words, it has failed to domesticate itself, it had died. Historically, when Islam survived in India, for example, why? Because it was Indians who were converting to Islam. Bosnia, it was Bosnians who were converting to Islam. It is not, if it was the Turks who would stay, it would have vanished. In Africa, when you look, it was Africans that were converting to Islam. And historically, you look at the history of Muslim minorities, invariably, they failed to become a domesticated part of the culture. Islam eventually does. Because it is, the dynamics of Muslim minorities are such. And I thought that's the proof that you're failing. Believe it or not, people were extremely upset about this. I did it 3 times, and then the 3rd time they said enough is enough. You can't start your lectures that way. Well, there were, of course, other things as well, but they had asked me several times nicely not to make that point. And 3 times I ignored them, and then the 3rd time they came and said, listen, if either you're going to stop making this point, or we're not going to have you come to our conferences again. Alhamdulillah, Islam is spreading. It's the fastest growing religion. I don't know why you want to give these kids the wrong impression about Islam. That Islam is in trouble or something. I said, because it's not the fastest growing religion. It's the Census Bureau that wanted you to believe this. That sold you that idea, and you bought into it. That's one. 2 is that if you count the converts, but you don't count the converts out, those who exit. And you don't count the number of Muslims that we lose through attrition. In other words, kids that grow up. As a professor, for example, I meet a lot of Muslim students who come, I have a Muslim origin. My dad is a Muslim, and my mom is Muslim, but I'm not. Tons. You guys don't see them because they don't like to associate with other Muslims. But tons. I have one of my students who converted, his mother and father are both Muslim. He converted to Christianity and now wants to be a priest. And when you talk to him, you feel this person, the only reason he wants to be a priest is because he is unable to separate Islam from his mother and father. He literally believes that it is a requirement in Islam to bring a huge pot and cook a lot of food and sit and curse and sit and backbite against all the people who are going to eat the food because you have to work so hard and they're so insensitive, they never help, and when it's their turn, the food they cook is far inferior to yours, and such person never served chicken, and you've noticed that, and so on. So in other words, that the culture of cooking and bitching is part, and he was trying to convince me that this is part of Islamic theology. I mean, he tried to convince me of that. And he was trying to convince me that it is also part of Islamic theology that because an imam had said in a khutbah that it is haram to ask another woman, what's your major in college? He came to me and said, the Quran says you cannot ask another woman, what's your major in college? And he's not a stupid person. But it gives you a sense of the extent of the deformity. You know, when we come and say open-mindedness, there's always that risk that the impression be created, well, this person is westernized. Right? Westernized. He believes in American liberal, corrupt, blah, blah, blah. I'm frankly, I'm sort of so often baffled that I feel sometimes really depression. I came from a village called Mikla al-Anab in Egypt. Small, very traditional, rural village. You literally, one of the very first hadiths you memorize is what? When you memorize the Quran, you read verses, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask people of dhikr. Dhikr, and then you ask the Shaykh, who are the people of dhikr? He says, well, it could be the pious people and the knowledgeable people, and there's this debate about what Ahl dhikr means. As a child, immediately, it strikes you, so there's debate about this one word in the Quran. I mean, I remember this very distinctly. This was the one thing in the Quran that I asked about. I mean, I was required to memorize the whole thing without asking any questions or knowing anything. But this is the one thing that I wanted to know. What's the difference? The Shaykh said, well, there's immediately, so there's debate. One of the very first hadiths you learn is what? لكل مجتهد نصيب. كل مجتهد مصيب. كل مجتهد مصيب. Every mujtahid is right. How could that be? Every mujtahid is right. I mean, if you think about it to what it means, the literal expression, this is the Prophet, this is the hadith from the Prophet. Every mujtahid is right. Right. Not every mujtahid, thank you very much for your effort. Not good job, but, there's right. No, every mujtahid is right. Giving them equal credibility. It says, if God decides, the same hadith, if God decides that you're correct, you get 2 points, 2 hasanat, ajran. If you're wrong, you get an ajr. So you're even compensated for being wrong. In other words, I can sit here and spew the stuff I spew about hijab and be completely wrong and still get rewards. In fact, more than that, I can sit here and make an argument, ijtihadi argument, that yes, women who are slaves should not, their awra from the knee to the navel, and still be rewarded. Now, I learned this I didn't even back then, we didn't even have a TV. Even though knowing something that we would hear from, the doctors who would come from Cairo about something called America, we used to call America, but no notion of, you don't have a TV, you have a radio, and the radio is always listening to, the voice of Cairo, or Iza'at al-Quran, the radio channel. What I'm saying is, early on, this idea of discourse, difference of opinion, that you can be wrong and compensated for being wrong, did not come from the West. It had nothing to do with the West. It came from my culture. It's something that was, and you know why? Because we always ask when you join your first Halaqa on fiqh, and then the Shaykh starts. You have to know that there were, at one point, 500 Islamic legal schools, that most of them have become extinct. And then this is the stuff you have to memorize. Among the extinct schools, مدرسة الأوزاعية, مدرسة الثورية, مدرسة السفيانية, مدرسة الطبرانية, and so on. You have to memorize all the extinct schools, and you have to memorize all the surviving schools. And then, the surviving schools, of course, in the Sunni world, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali, and so on. Zahriya, although the text exists, but it's extinct. And then you memorize the surviving schools in the Shia world and the extinct schools in the Shia world. And then the first question you ask your Shaykh, well, isn't it one Quran? And isn't it one Sunnah? Even between the Shia and Sunnah, we share most of the Sunnah is the same. So why all these schools? And then you learn as a child, as a 9-year-old who had just memorized the Quran and now starting to study fiqh, in your first halaqa, that everyone is the Khalifa. So I don't use English terms so people think, oh, well, you're Westerners. Everyone is the Khalifa of Allah, is the vicegerent of Allah. But no one is the Khalifa of Allah. And so you're told that, well, the reason there are all these schools because they're ijtihad and people disagreed and they all wanted to search the divine will, but they all disagreed because human beings, and then you're told that the Quran said, which of course you've memorized anyway, that you will continue, that we have made you into nations and tribes to discourse with one another. Lita'arafu means what? To get to know each other. How is knowledge possible without discourse? Know each other, I'm going to read the pamphlet from your Ministry of Tourism? That's knowing each other? No. It's discourse. And can some sane human being say, oh yes, but the discourse should be between Muslims and non-Muslims, but not between Muslims? I mean, it's insane. You're going to say that we should discourse with non-Muslims, but we shouldn't discourse amongst ourselves? And you learn this, and you say, well, that's why, and then in the final day, God will tell us. Then you say, but Shaykh, if God tells us that Shafi'i was wrong, is Shafi'i doomed for being wrong? And you are told that no, because of this hadith and so on. I mean, it is part and parcel of Islamic culture. The exception is the Wahhabi school. Now that's a different ballgame. The Wahhabi school, which was completely had no popularity until the 1973 when the price of oil shot up. And then it became very heavily funded and so on. The Wahhabi school has a very different ideology. Wahhabi school is basically, everything is rather clear cut. There is no complexity. But in order to create that, you need to weed out a lot of the sources. So that's why the Wahhabi school insists that you use the Quran and Sunnah directly and you do not use juridical sources. In other words, all these books are irrelevant. You go to the Quran and Sunnah direct, but instead of reading the considered works of someone far more knowledgeable than an Imam, the Imam is basically making himself a joke. I mean, I don't see the distinction. The Imam, the one you're reading, went to the Quran and Sunnah. You're saying, no, I won't take his opinion, I want to the Quran and Sunnah. Fine, go to the Quran and Sunnah, but make an argument to the evidence. That is not that. That's a different discourse. Most of the MSAs and so on, by the way, in the United States, most of the Islamic organizations in the United States are very much part and parcel of the Wahhabi type of ideological influence. Very hadith-oriented, by hadith meaning spirited hadith. The hadith that occur in Riyadh al-Salihin, mostly, the Gardens of the Righteous, collection by Nawawi, Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, the 40 Nawawi hadith. These are the ones that are most often used. Non-employment of juridical methodology, but fighting of juridical methodology. So, for example, when no one ever discusses what ijma' means, you are told that there's ijma' on this and ijma' on that and ijma' on this. That's all part of the Wahhabi discourse, which, whether, if you want, some people find it extremely persuasive. That I know that young people from other cultures have changed the course of American society with their activism. I mean, if you think about it, it wasn't the senior ancient migrant immigrants from Russia, senior Jewish immigrants from Russia that made the difference in American politics. It was the young Jewish kids that were born here. I mean, when you look at the history of Jewish activism in this country, the initial immigrants from Russia were really losers, to put it bluntly. I mean, they did nothing. They lived in ghettos and made some money and basically continued living isolated completely from their society. And not only that, I mean, in many other examples, several parts of the Hispanic community, again, you see the same type of dynamics. So I believe that young Muslims can do, but what they lack is the confidence that their understanding of Islam is legitimate as well. I mean, they very quickly are antagonized and threatened and scared and they go off on their own. And sometimes to the point that they can't even use the reason. I mean, I was in, the man got up and he gave a khutbah about how men and women are corrupting everything these days and so on, interaction point. And then he said, some of you commit kufr all the time, every day, and you don't observe the boundaries of God. With insolence, you violate the boundaries of God. For example, how many of you sit down on a chair after a woman has just gotten up? If a woman is sitting on a chair, the least you could do is to wait either 15 minutes or fan the chair before you sit down on the chair. Because otherwise, you will feel her body heat, and that's it. Now, okay. And he's serious, he wasn't joking. You either wait 15 minutes or you fan the chair before sitting down. This is what, again, I call Islamic playballs. Because it is sexually obsessed. What type of mentality gets, I don't know, maybe I'm strange, but I can't conceive. My suggestion to someone who gets excited because he just sat where a woman was sitting is to see a psychologist. You really need help. But this was a khutbah. Now, you find American Muslims, this is the context. You find these kids who are attending this was during the summer, it was given and it taught. Something tells them that this just can't be. But at the same time, they're afraid that if they say anything or whatever, then they're not good Muslims. So what do? They just stay away. They just don't come to the mosque. In this khutbah, I knew two women who left Islam because of this khutbah. And their basis was, he's an imam. When I was talking to them, they said, he's an imam, he wears the abaya. You're not. I was wearing a shirt and trousers that day. So he must really know what Islam is, and this type of religion we don't want to follow. You must, you really don't know Islam and so on. There's some absurdity that are committed all the time, and it's you only find it in the Islamic context where it's actually absorbed and accepted. When you find a mosque basically saying women can attend the Halaqa, but behind the curtain, and if they want to ask questions, they have to write the question down and surrender and hand it over. And you have to put this took several evenings of discussion. You have to write the question, put it in a basket, push the basket out because you don't want to run the risk of the possibility that when the woman inside behind the curtain is handing the questions over to the man, that their hands will touch. And that would be haram. So you have to put it in a basket and you push it out. Now, by God, tell me, does this have anything to do with Islam or the sources? Or is this basically extremely repressed psychology? I can't see that this has anything to do with Islam. I mean, if someone comes to me and provides discussion from the sources, and some have, some of my sheikhs were extremely conservative in that sense. The difference was they made an argument and they respected the argument of another. That was the difference. They understood that other sheikhs allowed women in their halaqas, and they were not Catholics according to these sheikhs. And, we were free to do whatever. I remember some of the women have asked us to boycott the halaqas of the sheikhs that don't allow them to attend. And it was, back then, frankly, I didn't like women very much. And I told the woman, no, I won't support you. Why should I suffer for you? Sorry. The point is, again, a dynamism that goes on. Other students in the halaqa backed up the woman and refused to attend the halaqa. I didn't nowhere in this dynamic that I think anyone was a Catholic. Nowhere. Well, the examples are so many, especially when it comes to the issue of women and sexes. I once spent a whole week in Arizona, in the mosque in Phoenix. Do you know why? I wasted a week research because women in prayer, the imam made a mistake, none of the men corrected him. So she corrected. It was, no, the woman is supposed to clap. But she's not supposed to correct verbally. But clapping is haram in other contexts. In other words, if a speaker says, you don't clap, you say takbir. By the way, this issue of takbir has no basis in Islamic law. I mean, the prohibition against clapping does. There are schools that say you don't clap. Why? Because when the Meccans used to go around the Kaaba, they used to clap and whistle. And so it became a form of pagan association. Some schools said, well, these were the Meccans. Now, catch the Imam's error, and she seems to be the only one paying attention in prayer to correct the Imam. I mean, I think whatever the violation, she deserves a pat on the back and say, good job. You did, and even if you want to correct her, say, but you see, then you sit there and you discover that it's two schools that said a woman should clap, she shouldn't correct, and I don't know, 3 schools that say no, she can correct verbally, and another school that said she goes not, so she doesn't use words, and so on. But is this the type of stuff you want to have you absorbed by? I mean, this is what's going to allow us to build an Islamic civilization, is whether you clap or you clear your throat, or I don't know. It's an absurdity. The whole field is rather minimal. There are a lot. When Bin Baz, Sheikh Bin Baz in Saudi Arabia, he issued a fatwa saying that it is haram for women to wear bras. Okay, this was his fatwa. I have the fatwa. This was issued in 1986. Bin Baz issued the fatwa. The rationale for the fatwa is it's fraudulent advertising, to put it nice. In other words, by doing that, you are misrepresenting fact, and consequently, when a person marries that woman under certain expectations and finds something different. Okay, this is the fatwa. You find several imams here, and in Ikna and so on, these places. They get up and the same thing, they announce to kids. Without any notion of, do you know who is it that doesn't wear brassieres in this country? You're giving, even if we say that it's supported, which of course I think is absurd, because it has nothing, the only basis is fraudulent advertising. So you come and you tell these teenage girls attending Ikna, oh, you must know that the wearing of brassiere is haram and it's against Sharia. And these people don't realize that they're destroying religion, effectively destroying religion. Because then, when you even want to debate it, it's not open to debate. It is part of Sharia. And they even forget that it's part of Sharia because Bin Baz said so. So they don't even remember that it comes from Bin Baz. They are under the impression that it comes from some hadith or something like that. Muslim discourses are extremely problematic. I mean, I haven't done something like this in about 3 years, and I created this exception, as I told you, for my own thing. But it is so disillusioning that you just don't feel like you want to do it anymore. It's very marginal, it's very limited, and the worst of all is that the government's persecuted. I mean, most of my sheikhs have been either killed in prison or, So the government persecutes it, so it's not even done comfortably. The reason, I was very lucky. I was growing up in the 70s, and at that time, Sadat was going through his good phase. So he allowed a lot of this. So that got repressive towards the end, but by that time I had received my education. So he got repressive too late. And then Mubarak is just chasing everyone and so on. But this type of, so it's based on a haphazard chance. You can't you can't continue this course this way. And much more, no one is really interested in reading this material because it's very easy to read other material, and life is becoming so difficult that the type of serenity and peace for you to sit, like imagine if I would have written this lecture today, if I would have written it down, to have the patience to actually sit and read it, you must have some degree of peace and serenity in your own life. I mean, literally, you must be able to afford half an hour before you go to bed, make a cup of coffee and sit and not worry about anything else. But when your life is basically going around all day, finishing, bureaucratic papers and worrying about how you're going to survive, and, life in Muslim countries, you much rather read a book that is like by Maududi. Everything is very clear. There's black and white, everything, and so on and so forth. And with Muslims in the United States, it's the same thing, but it's for different reasons. Muslims in the United States have the disease of being spoon-fed and spoiled. Sort of hamburger knowledge mentality, what we call hamburger knowledge, or, Coca-Cola vending machine mentality. You put the coin, you hit it, it's very fast, it's very efficient, it's done. You find that permeates, there's no real patience. Even you find undergraduate school, for example, here in the university, undergraduates are extremely impatient to basically talk to you as if they're equal authorities. And in this society, you indulge it because that's part of it. They want to feel like they paid their dues before they paid anything. It's very different from the type of slow-paced attitude to knowledge that exists in contexts like Asia. For example, that, you have to memorize the full Quran before you earn the right to ask your teacher a question. You learn patience, believe me. You really learn patience. You learn to have that burning in you and say, well, I'm not going to be able to, it's very patient and step by step. That's a big problem for American Muslims. American Muslims specifically.
The major problem with American Muslims actually, it's not just the memorizing Quran, actually knowing Arabic at all.
No, I'm not saying that they have to memorize the Quran.
Yeah, but I'm saying, do you feel that way yourself? That for people to know Arabic, understand the Quran?
I don't know about understand the Quran. Let me put it this way. You need Arabic if you want to be a spokesperson for Islamic law. Or, in other words, if you want to be a specialist on Islamic Sharia obligation. Otherwise, no, I do not think you need Arabic to understand the Quran. Otherwise, you are representing nothing but your own personal view, and you should recognize it as such. And you should advocate it as such. Every Muslim has a right to read the Quran and say, this is what I think. If a jurist comes and says, no, you're wrong, then you have a right to read the jurist and say, I don't agree. Why don't you agree? You know what is really ironic about Islamic civilization? This is very ironic. A jurist always has to tell you why he reaches a certain ruling. A non-jurist never has to tell you why he decides to follow or not follow the ruling. In other words, the jurist always has to give reasons. The tabi', al-am, never has to give reasons, because it's between that person and God. A jurist is liable before God, so a jurist is sort of stepping in a representational relationship. And so they will always say, now in Islamic law, for example, a jurist comes and you come and ask me, is music haram or halal? And I say haram. Or I say halal, whichever, it doesn't matter. And you say, okay, thank you very much, and you take off. Now, have you escaped liability? According to Islamic law, Islamic juridical discourses, no. Even if you do what's right, no. You know why? Because you didn't ask me what my reasons for saying this is. You escape liability only if you listen to the reasons, you consider the reasons without hawa, without whim, and then decide. And that is why you can do shopping. You can go to several jurists and ask. There is no, Islamic law didn't even treat an ilzamiyya, an obligation to follow. If you consult 5 jurists, and each of them tell you something, you're not even obligated to accept one of their opinions. Sort of these poor jurists in Islamic discourses, it's like they spend their whole life reading and acquiring knowledge only to be told people are completely free to ignore you if they want to. You should show respect to knowledge and knowledgeable people, but you could say, I respect you, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. That's all. So so let's go back to American Muslims. The American Muslims, when we talk about American Muslims, we say, okay, if you want to be a jurist yourself, yeah, you need to know Arabic, you need to know much more than Arabic. If you want to basically represent your own views, no, you need to be able to consult these people. And you need to be able to read the Quran and understand the Quran. And you need to be able to do jihad against your own whims and resist your own temptations. In other words, be critical with yourself, be harsh on yourself. Know when you're doing something because you have an incentive to do it, selfish incentive, and when you're doing it because you really believe it. How many times have I seen people make an argument for or against hijab? Maybe this is not your experience, not your experiences that you've encountered, but like the Qurayshi camp, I've heard people make an argument for or against hijab depending on the women they're interested in at the moment.